Hi everyone, and today I will be doing my extremely subjective ranking for all of the Wings of Fire material that we've had over the years, with the exception of things like the graphic novels. I've been wanting to do this video for quite some time now, and I basically thought that with the release of the Flames of Hope just over the horizon, today's as good a day as any for me to finally get to this long overdue ranking. Please remember that this is only my opinion and I'm not trying to pass it as objective truth, because I acknowledge that it's not. Anyway, there will be spoilers, so you've been warned if you haven't read these books. Anyway, on with the video, and I hope you enjoy the actual tier list. I've just filled in all of these, and someone who I've forgotten to credit has kindly put in all of these here. And let's get started. I think, first of all, the Hive Queen goes right up here because it's my go-to for when I just want something to read that I don't necessarily have to think too hard about, and it's not dark or super deep, but it's very interesting. And when it's cringe, it acknowledges that it's cringe, which I think is a very cool thing, rather, opposed to the alternative. And it's just very enjoyable to read, even if there are some books which are better. And the same goes with the same kind of goes for The Brightest Night. Let me just get this up here. So it definitely has that aspect of feeling really nice to read, and it's very wholesome, and it's not too dark, but it's also got a very interesting plot. Same with this, really, but the thing that jumps out to me about The Brightest Night is the finale, because I think it was just so well done and so well executed that it just bumps the book up massively for me, because I don't think a finale has been done as that well in the entirety of the rest of the series. So it's just it's also nostalgic for me. So there's that too. I think the first book for the excellent category is going to be Darkstalker, and that's probably going to be a bit controversial because Darkstalker is everyone's favorite, right? But it's also kind of dark, and it's definitely not the thing that I would read if I just wanted something light to read. It's very good, and I think that the characters are really interesting. The plot is really, really cool, and I love the period of time that's being explored within the book, but it's not what I would read if I just wanted something light to pick up for 30 minutes. Um, hmm. Okay, so this will be controversial again because people like Winter Turning, people like Winter's character, but I don't really like Winter's character. I don't see the appeal. So Winter Turning's just kind of meh for me. You'll notice that there are no categories that are actually just bad because, in my very subjective opinion, none of these books are actually bad. There are just some books I like more than others and some books that other people like more than others. And, that's what this list is representing. Even if excellent, good, decent are objective qualities and not, subjective, which is the way that I'm using them. And for Assassin, this is just the thing that immediately comes to mind when I think of the most boring piece of Wings of Fire material, because it's slow, and slow things can get done well, but there's absolutely nothing important happens in this book that you couldn't have had explained by just a single prologue chapter. And so it feels very long and very unnecessary. And I think it is very long and very unnecessary. It actually, I think it could have been used in place of the book 10 prologue, because that could have been explained by Onyx when they were in the dungeon meeting Prickle. That might actually work. I mean, obviously, it's not perfect because the book wasn't constructed that way. It's not going to be perfect realistically. But I just I would much rather have a different winglet on a different subject than Prisoners. It's just not very interesting. The Dangerous Gift, kind of the opposite of this one. The opposite of the Hive Queen, that is, in the fact that it's a pretty good book and it has some very exciting events, especially like the Jerboa chapters and the very end. But as a whole, it's very slow, and I wouldn't call it boring like Prisoners because this has actual significant events, and it is moving us toward the end of the arc, but it's doing it very, very slowly. And that would be okay if it was just, a winglet or a legend. And I think it could have been a winglet if just a very, very long for a winglet, because it did not need to have the amount of pages or the focus that it did. And I feel like those pages would have been better spent explaining more about the other mind or more about the actual Pantalan situation. Because the thing is, we get three books on Pantala, and then in the arc, which is supposed to be about Pantala, and then we just get the most like pure Pyrian protagonist that there is, and it's really interesting to see her character development, but um, it's slow, and that's just its big problem. It's not terribly relevant to the overarching plot of the arc. Although there are good moments, and that's why it's in good rather than decent. Although those can kind of be used interchangeably. I think Deserter is probably my favorite of the winglets because I like Six Claw's character. I feel like it's sort of what a winglet should be. It's not boring, but it's also not about someone super important doing super important things, because that's not really what a winglet's for. A winglet is like you can read it if you want to, but it's not necessary to the actual plot of the story. It also shows Burns' brutality, and that was something kind of difficult to read again, but I think it's definitely the best out of the winglets. Assassin is probably the runner-up. Runaway could be. It's just not really my thing. But for Deserter, I think the only reason that it's not actually higher than good is because again, it's that's not the way that the winglets are constructed. They're meant to be short stories, and Deserter very much is one. Um, hmm. Let's address the big one, as in terms of pages and also kind of controversial, Dragon Slayer. I don't know if I want to put it on the same league as Darkstalker because it's a very different story, and I don't really think it's as good. However, it's easier to read, it's pretty enjoyable, and I think a lot of the reason that people don't like it is just because it has human protagonists, which is a fair thing, a fair reason not to like the book, but I genuinely thought it was fine, and that's coming from someone who I one of the reasons that I was drawn to Wings of Fire is because it was a fantasy story with dragons, and it was the first one that I've ever read which didn't focus on humans while just including dragons as background characters. And I thought that was really cool. But I think it was done pretty well. Some of the stuff is like there were some decisions that were sort of questionable regarding like the end, which I think could have been wrapped up differently. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a good book, and a lot of the reason that people don't like it is unfair to it. So it's in good, if not even higher. Um, Actually, you know what? I'm going to change this tier name. Solid. Because they're all good, and just calling it good is it doesn't represent what I think about it. The Dark Secret is a difficult read. Some of the stuff is kind of dark, and it's kind of depressing. It's not what you would read if you just wanted something light to read. But at the same time, it's really cool. We get a lot of world building details about the Nightwings, which I enjoyed because, we also got that very big reveal at the end of it. And because I've done a spoiler warning, I don't know, I'm just not going to say it anyway. But if you know, you know. The reveal at the end of this, at the end of the Dark Secret, kind of blew my mind at the time I read it, and I think it's solid. Yeah. Okay, Darkness of Dragons. I've done a video on why I don't like the ending of Darkness of Dragons and how the ending could have wrapped up things better. But Darkness of Dragons has the enormous responsibility of finishing a plotline that's not only spanned for 5 books, if not more, because for a time it was going to be the end of the series. But it also has the responsibility of wrapping up Darkstalker's plot, which is not an easy thing to do in any way, because Darkstalker was such a big character. He had his own book, and he's been talked about since book 5. We've really been building up to Darkstalker and this horrible person in some ways, because he's really charismatic. He cares about the people who he cares about, although there aren't very many of them. But he's very manipulative. He's definitely not an objectively good person, or dragon in this case. But overall, he has a very interesting character, and it the Darkness of Dragons just wasn't able to resolve that in a way that the fandom found fulfilling, which is fair. And I've criticized the ending of Darkness of Dragons before, but even the stuff leading up to the ending I thought was really good. I loved getting Kibley's backstory. More of the stuff about Queen Oasis is always a good thing. I really like that sort of thing. And I think the ending kind of drags it down, which is really unfortunate because it's definitely one of the better installments in the series. So it's kind of a shame that I can't put it above some of these other installments, but they're all solid, and I don't think that it can really quite be called excellent at the level that it is right now. So I don't know, but it's a difficult evaluation for me. Anyway, so now we have the Hidden Kingdom. It's going to be controversial, but I'm putting it in decent. Now, before you attack me, I realize that a lot of people like this book, and they have a pretty good reason for liking the book. We learn a lot about the world, and we get to have Glory's character develop in a way that felt true to herself and not forced at all, which was just really interesting to read. But about Glory's character, I feel like for the first bit of the first arc, including a bit of this book, she's just kind of been unnecessarily rude. And I feel like that sort of makes me gravitate toward her less. Also, there's the Deathbringer thing, which is, I think, Tui messed up the ages unintentionally. Again, that's just a mistake though, and I don't think the book should be dragged down for that. And again, it's sort of like the Winter Turning, where we get to see multiple kingdoms, and that's really really cool. And we also get to meet Blaze, and it's just an interesting book overall. But I think interesting sums up my feelings about it. I don't think that it was particularly good. I think it was solid, but I think there's a definite divide between how much I enjoyed the books that I've put in solid and how much I enjoyed The Hidden Kingdom. So it's biased, but that's what a subjective ranking is at the end of the day. It's biased. The Poison Jungle. It's a very good book. It's definitely not light, like I was saying with these. It's um, it's got a lot in it. I think the romance was actually interesting and done pretty well, which is, I don't want to say unusual for Wings of Fire, but the romances can be a bit forced, and it didn't feel like that at all with the Poison Jungle. And I think part of that is because Sunju and Willow's relationship was pre-existing, which meant that Tui didn't have to create a fully new relationship within the span of like 5 days, which is how long just the time period that each of these books takes up. So it, I think, just made the dynamic feel a lot more natural, whereas it can feel very forced, especially in the case of The Hidden Kingdom, because you just don't really get enough time in a 300-page book, which is only supposed to go over the course of 1 week. You don't really get enough time to elaborate. Again, sort of with Darkness of Dragons, I feel like it's definitely above a lot of these books in Solid, but because it has a more solid ending and I just enjoy it, I'm going to actually bump it up to excellent. And I think that's a understandable choice on my part. Okay, so the first book in the whole series, the one that started all, The Dragonite Prophecy, it has the disadvantage of being the first book in a series, which means it's going to be slow. The author doesn't have as much experience with it, and sometimes it can sort of suffer as a result. And I think this book is not an exception. There are points where it's kind of slow, kind of tedious, or not slow, but it is kind of tedious at points. And it's not fully the same series as we're seeing just a few books later in The Brightest Night. I feel like it's not, I don't know, it just suffers from first book in a series syndrome, which, I mean, it's unfair to hold that against it, but you kind of have to, because that's just the way it was written, and that's the way how you're going to consume it. By that I mean reading it, not actually eating it. That would be very weird. Please don't eat books. That's no. Okay. And anyway, do I think it's solid? It's solid. Maybe I should just change this back to good. I'm not going to, but maybe, because kind of like the Hidden Kingdom, it's solid, but it's got a couple of pitfalls. Something that I highlighted about this book before in terms of the writing style is that it can feel a bit bare bones at times, and that's not meant as an insult to Tui, because she's done a phenomenal job with all of these books. But I think that just this suffers for being the first one, and yeah, it belongs in decent because I've ranted over it for too long now. The Lost Continent, I think, is just an easy solid for me. It's enjoyable. The plot is interesting. I think it introduced Pantala in a fun and engaging way, and I just think it's solid. It's solid. Oh, I forgot to mention, I simply can't wait to see Pantala represented in the graphic novel form. And I don't know, I just had to share that because the excitement. And now that we know that we're going to get Moon Rising in graphic novel form, and we're also going to probably get the rest of the second arc in graphic novel form. So if you're going to do the first one and you're planning to do the second one, then I wouldn't say it's a stretch that we are going to see the Lost Continent Prophecy realized in graphic novel form, which is really cool. Yeah. Okay, so this one, The Lost Heir. It's the first Wings of Fire book I ever read, so I'm very biased in its favor. And I think there's a time not too long ago where I might have even put this at excellent, but again, the romance is forced, and that takes up an unfortunately large amount of its plot. But it's, I mean, on the other side of that spectrum, I liked seeing Tsunami's character evolve from sort of being snobby and bossy to actually considerate, and I thought that was cool, and it felt pretty natural. But I'm still gonna put this at solid because I'm biased in its favor, even if it does kind of belong in the same league as these. Um, okay, now we have Prisoners, which it's one of the winglets, which no, it's not in Meh. Definitely not in Meh. I would probably put this just after Deserter in my list of how much I like the Winglet books. But it does introduce the idea of Deathbringer being way older than he should be. And that's, I mean, the book, it's an enjoyable book, but it didn't have to exist. So, I mean, it could belong in just why, because why does it exist? But also, like, it's not bad, and I definitely enjoyed reading it, so I'm gonna put it in decent. Yeah, that feels about right. Um, Moon Rising is a fan a fan favorite in terms of books, and I enjoyed seeing Moonwatcher's character. I enjoyed the Jade Mountain stuff, and I really enjoyed having Darkstalker in like telepathically communicating with Moon, and I just think it's solid, honestly. And I know some people will think that I should put it higher because a lot of people really like it, but I don't like it that much. I just think it's a solid book. You know, could have been better, but it definitely could have been worse, and it wasn't worse. It was pretty good. I think it did a good job of introducing us to the new characters and making us like them, except for Winter. I can't bring myself to like Winter. Um, Peril, again, her character is kinda, her arc kinda is forced, and I think Tui sort of acknowledges that in a way, but also I think that by the time she gets to this book, she's an interesting protagonist to read. And while she is a little bit crazy and angry at everything, I think it's kind of helps the book actually. And I like getting to see the Sky Kingdom again, and I like seeing how Ruby was actually putting the place back together again. As you know, I'm becoming a much better queen than her mother was. But I I don't know. I think it's just decent in my honestly, I just think it's decent. Next we have Talons of Power. I like it, but I don't think I can put it above all of these books in excellent. And now I realize solid is just becoming a tier of all the good books, which I don't know where to put, but I think it fits there honestly. And then Runaway, which is um I think you either like it or you don't, because again, it doesn't have too much of a purpose to exist, but it's definitely better than Prisoners, and I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Winter Turning, so I think it goes up to decent. And now I'm realizing that the favorite and excellent categories are a bit sparse and kind of probably should have been merged. But also, I think this is just a good representation of how I feel about all the Wings of Fire books. So, thank you for watching as long as you have. That was very